Hi, I'm Mike Wassenaar with Free Press at the National Conference for Media Reform in Denver, Colorado. And I was speaking with Jason Barnett, who's the executive director of the Uptake, which is based in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. Jason, welcome to the National Conference for Media Reform.
Thanks, Mike. It's good seeing you again.
So tell our viewers a little bit about the Uptake. If people haven't run into it, what is the Uptake?
We're an online news organization. We generally produce civic type of content. We live stream a lot of policy things, live stream legislatures, debates, other things that the legacy media tends to not cover anymore.
And when you say legacy media, you'd classify yourself as sort of an emerging media
We're
outfit?
definitely emerging.
Okay. Okay, and then what do you mean by that when we say emerging?
Yeah, so we're primarily a web platform, so we don't use a lot of traditional cable channel, satellite feeds. We don't print a newspaper. We also aren't for profit. We're a nonprofit. And so the legacy media basically in the lingo is everyone that came before the internet, and how they're trying to continue their power.
So what niche are you filling that other organizations are not filling?
We're filling the niche of basically just more transparency in our power, people who have power, elected officials, who's actually in office, what are they actually doing. There's been significant cutbacks in state capitol reporting across the country. Up to like 30% of all capitol reporters have been laid off. And some states are even worse than that. And so this type of coverage, the type of coverage that actually holds account our own government is not happening. And it's not happening at a very significant level. And why that matters is that we don't know what our elected officials are doing. We're not asking the tough questions. The special interests that are there all the time, that have the money and the lobbyists, are getting away with more and more of what they want.
So you guys are actually providing a window into processes and activities that are happening at the state capitol and community
Outside
settings, so that you're really trying to give people a window on things that matter in the world that aren't being covered in other news organizations.
That aren't being covered. I mean, it's really a civic service is what we're doing, and we're trying to help educate people about the process and what's happening. We're also, since we're on the web and we're able to cut clips, we're able to take some of this content that sometimes be seen as boring or like TV newsrooms say, oh, why no one would ever watch that, so why would we be there? And we're actually to take some of these clips and actually drive very high traffic on the web to get more awareness to actually what's happening at the Capitol.
And you've been involved with a couple of very, very large incidents in Minnesota, Wisconsin, that really have sort of driven national news coverage, and being a part of the scene really helped to actually create public interest in those events, didn't it?
Right. So, like the big events were in 2008 when we were just getting started. We covered the RNC in St. Paul, Minnesota. We covered the DNC here too in Denver, and then we had this the longest recount between Norm Coleman and Al Franken for the Senate race in Minnesota that went on forever. And we live streamed that whole thing. That never had happened before for that type of trial, and we got a lot of international attention from that. And then we went to Copenhagen and covered the climate talks and did similar protest coverage, panel coverage of inside the panels, produced hours and hours and hours of content for 2 weeks. And that was a really interesting. We've done international coverage.
So do you think it's possible to have that type of project going on in communities around the country?
I do. The problem is, and this is one of the things that I'm not hearing enough of at the Media Reform Conference, is the problem is the business models don't exist to support this type of work. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why newspapers have laid off staff at capitals. It's because advertising collapsed. Yep. And so the legacy media aren't always bad. Sometimes they have real business reasons for doing what they're doing. But these voids have to be filled just for the health of our own democracy. And so what we really need to do is figure out business models that can sustain this type of work. We're a nonprofit, so we work with foundations, but foundations aren't really geared to funding media. They're geared to funding advocacy, or they're geared to funding causes, and they're not used to funding media. And even though they're doing it in kind of a backwards way, a lot of the advocacy groups they fund end up spending a lot of money on TV ad buys, and so their foundation money is actually going to help support corporate media, but that's a long circle that really needs a change. But foundations, the reform is past just where the reform that's needed is past media. It's actually our entire philanthropic structure needs to change.
So is that part of the reason why the National Conference for Media Reform is important to you, or
It is
why,
important
why
to me,
media
yeah.
reform is important to you?
Media reform is important to me, not only because I'm in it. I mean, I didn't always used to be
Right.
in media. I chose this because I believe in it. But, you know, these changes have to happen. Or if we don't happen, then we're going to be losing more power as citizens. And the power is going, what is it? The power, the vacuum line, I can't think of it. Anyway, like when there's a void of power, someone's going to fill it.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that are filling it now are those with significant money, very rich corporations. They're driving legislatures, they're driving bills being passed, and we're not covering it. We're not showing what's happening. And so they're able to get away with it. And they're able, because no one knows, no one cares, because they don't know this is happening. They don't know that their life changes or their mortgage is lost until it's already happened. Mm-hmm. And because people aren't covering it ahead of time. You know, if you look at the Iraq War, for example, how the media was complicit in not analyzing what that happened and the consequences of that. If you look at the mortgage crisis and how people didn't cover what was happening with these financial institutions, and that could have been avoided if the media was robust enough to do the investigation that's needed. And so that's why I think this conference is desperately needed for our democracy. We got to ask more questions, and we got to figure out better business models so these organizations can survive.
And for people who don't know the Uptake, they can find your work at theuptake.org.
.org,
Theuptake.org. Jason Barnett, Executive Director of the Uptake. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks,
here.
Mike.
And I'm Mike Wassner from Free Press here on Free Speech TV.